On March 2nd, 1998, in the commune of Strasshof and der Nordbahn, Lower Austria, 10-year-old Natasha had an argument with her mother and left for school, never arriving. 3,096 days later, the girl returned and gave chilling details of what happened. I remember the day everything changed. I was 10 years old. On my school holidays, me and my father were relaxing at a bar. He was proud of me, introducing me to everyone and encouraging me to enjoy the evening. However, at some point I got tired and asked him to take me home. He was drunk and refused, insisting that I stay. The next day, I woke up exhausted. My mother rushed me to school because she also had to go to work. We argued about the dress she had laid out for me. I thought it made me look fat, but she insisted I wear it. During breakfast, she noticed that I looked tired and asked if my father had taken me to the bar again. I lied to protect him, but she knew the truth. She expressed her disapproval, and I shouted back, demanding that she leave me alone and denying that I had been at the bar. After receiving a slap, I angrily grabbed my things and left, despite my mother's apologies. I started walking to school alone, with my mother watching me from the window. As I turned onto an empty street, a van pulled up beside me, and a stranger suddenly grabbed me and hit me on the head to subdue me. The van soon stopped in a quiet area, and Wolfgang, the man who had abducted me, carried me into a house. He put me in a tiny room that only had a sink and a toilet. He locked me in and left. This room was underground, and the entrance to it was a tunnel under the sink, hidden by a movable cabinet. The only way in was through a secret door in the floor. I soon regained consciousness and realized I had been kidnapped. I looked around and called for help in vain. Later, Wolfgang came with a pillow for the bed while I shivered in the corner. Left alone again, I called for help once more, but my efforts were futile, so I decided to conserve my energy and ate my food. 3 days later, Wolfgang read me a fairy tale book, and I, now calmer, ate cookies while listening to my captor. The fairy tale ended, and the man signaled for me to stop eating, which I immediately obeyed. I lay down on the bed, and Wolfgang turned on the nightlight. I asked questions, but my captor ignored them, so I asked for a goodnight kiss, just like my mother used to do. The captor kissed me on the head and left. Meanwhile, at my house, my grandmother and mother watched the news. Unfortunately, the authorities couldn't find me. Reporters also covered the news and wrote about my mother's guilt. In the meantime, I remained resilient and decided to keep track of time, dates, and measure the room. He decided to visit me, and I gave him a letter for my parents, telling them not to worry. Wolfgang read the letter and then helped me wash my hair, using only a bottle of water. However, he started to control my every move and emphasized my worthlessness when I couldn't follow his instructions. I demanded that he release me because my family loved me, but the captor insisted otherwise, saying that they wouldn't even pay a ransom. Wolfgang grew angrier when I started to cry. He roughly washed my hair, creating a mess, which intensified his anger as he couldn't stand disorder. As I learned later, the next day, Wolfgang's grandmother and mother visited him for afternoon coffee. The police arrived to check on his white van, which had reportedly been seen where I disappeared. The captor calmly talked to the police officers, explaining that he had been watching the news. The officers mentioned that they had already checked a bunch of white vans with tinted windows, but to no avail. During the inspection of his van, they asked about his job, and he said he worked as a technician for a telecommunications company but was currently unemployed. When asked about his whereabouts on the day of my disappearance, he replied that he was home alone, but to dispel any suspicion, he invited the police officers to have coffee with his mother and grandmother, who had come to visit him. Upon seeing the elderly ladies, the police officers left. Meanwhile, I reminisced about my precious moments with my parents when we were still together. When my captor came to see me again, he installed an intercom so he could hear what I was doing when he was upstairs. 183 days later, I had gotten used to my life, playing with my old clothes as companions. One day, I pretended to be a news reporter interviewing myself about how I escaped from my captor. However, I couldn't come up with an answer since the captor was much bigger than me. Suddenly, Wolfgang spoke through the intercom, startling me. He asked if I had brushed my teeth and washed the dishes. Knowing that I hadn't, he authoritatively repeated the phrase, "Obey me," several times. Irritated, I played with my toothpaste and noticed that it could stick to my skin when it dried. When Wolfgang gave me food, I pretended that my hand was injured, showing him the dried toothpaste as a wound, and asked to be taken to a doctor. Realizing my intention to escape, he punished me by stopping my food supply, claiming that I was fat. I started calling for help, and the man then subdued me. He then explained and showed why it was impossible to escape from the basement. 4 days passed, and I still didn't have any food. Despite standing my ground, I finally gave in and asked for food through the intercom. Receiving no response, I aggressively demanded food, but my screams soon turned into pleas as hopelessness consumed me. Silently listening to me, Wolfgang was finally satisfied upon hearing the desperation in my voice, so he repeated into the intercom several times, "Obey me." 4 years later, my captor continued to brainwash me into doing whatever he wanted, repeating "Obey me" over the intercom and punishing me with starvation. One day, Wolfgang's mother came to the house again. He told me that she ordered him around, dictating what food to eat and how to keep the house spotlessly clean. As she was leaving, she noticed a strand of blonde hair on her son's shirt and asked about it. The mother didn't wait for an answer and sighed, saying that she was happy because she thought her son preferred men. Because of this incident, Wolfgang shaved my head bald. Christmas came, and we celebrated together. I decorated my room, and Wolfgang gave me presents, videotaping me opening them. However, he kept pointing out how a real lady should conduct herself in everything. I thanked him for another book he had given me and hugged him in gratitude. I then asked about my family, but Wolfgang angrily replied that my only family was him. He then ordered me to choose a new name for myself. I chose the name Vivian, but Wolfgang insisted on calling me Vivi. After some time, Wolfgang renovated the house with my help. When I asked if he was doing the renovation for me, the captor angrily hit a sledgehammer on the dry cement mix, showering me with dust. Despite the shock, I remained calm and asked to take a shower. He allowed it, but stated that I would sleep with him upstairs that night. That evening in his bedroom, Wolfgang prepared a plastic tie and tied one of my hands to his as we lay down on the bed together. Over the next few days, I remained completely obedient to my captor and softly asked to go outside. Wolfgang said I could if I behaved well, so I quietly returned to my room. Wolfgang went to the grocery store to buy sanitary pads for me and a package for intimate protection. He continued to spend nights with me, regularly tying my hand to his. One day, I asked to go outside to see the garden. Tied together, we stepped outside under the moonlight. While I admired the night sky, he decided to go back inside. However, I stopped him, arousing his anger, and he took me back to the basement. But in spite of everything, I danced joyfully in my room for the first time. Wolfgang became stricter the next day and started nitpicking everything I did, but I remained compliant. I looked at the forest wall decoration in the kitchen to comfort myself and imagined roaming freely through it. Unfortunately, my daydreaming was cut short when Wolfgang denied me food again. When he turned away, I desperately grabbed his food and stuffed it into my mouth, but he managed to stop me and punished me. Days later, he became harsher with me, not allowing me to wear clothes and locking me underground. Coming upstairs one day, I angrily hit him, so he shaved my head bald again, but this time I didn't shed a tear. The following days were easier for me. The man became kinder, provided me with clothes, and started taking me out into the city. He also warned me that he had a gun and could shoot me or anyone else if I tried to escape. We went to a hardware store, and he roughly grabbed my neck to prevent me from looking at people. Wolfgang left me alone, and many people passed by me. But despite wanting to ask for help, I was paralyzed when I heard my captor's voice in my head, whispering, "Obey me." So I didn't speak to anyone. 2,175 days had passed in captivity. I finished renovating my new room in the attic. Wolfgang videotaped me as I struggled to lay the heavy carpet. I hid my frustration and posed seductively for the camera to satisfy my captor. A few days later, he blindfolded me and led me to my new bedroom. I pretended to be surprised and grateful, as if I was seeing this place for the first time, despite the fact that I had renovated it myself. Soon, I heard news about my disappearance case on the radio, which left me utterly dejected. At that moment, Wolfgang interrupted my solitude as a new bed was delivered. He soon gave me lingerie for our first wedding night. I asked him why he chose me, and he explained that he simply saw my smile. When I was 10 years old, Wolfgang was a customer at my mother's store, and that's when he first saw me smiling while eating a cookie. It took him 10 months to prepare everything for me. The pipes, the cables, the ventilation, my basement room. I listened in silence, and then Wolfgang suddenly cut the tie on my hands to consummate our first wedding night. Left alone in my room in the basement, I screamed in frustration when I realized how cunning my captor had been. Losing hope, I turned on the electric stove and lit some cigarette paper. As the smoke spread, I hugged my old dress and started to choke. However, I soon changed my mind and cleaned everything up thoroughly. Unfortunately, Wolfgang smelled the smoke and mercilessly beat me, ordering me not to dare commit suicide. I then asked him to let me go, or else one of us had to die. From that moment on, I recorded every blow I received from my captor on cigarette paper, loudly narrating it, knowing that he was listening through the intercom. 2,847 days after my abduction, Wolfgang took me to a ski resort, where he forced me to ski despite my weakened body. Soon, I asked to use the toilet. Wolfgang checked the restroom and waited outside. I could tell by the sounds that there was someone there from whom I could ask for help. I introduced myself and told her about my situation, but unfortunately, the woman spoke a different language and didn't understand anything. Upon returning home, Wolfgang asked about the incident, and when I started denying everything, he punished me. Each time, my eyes lit up with even more determination as I marked each blow I received. He soon allowed me to stay in the garden to help him. Unexpectedly, a neighbor climbed up a ladder to trim the hedge and saw us on the lawn. Wolfgang then grabbed me out of sight, and I again failed to ask for help. Months passed peacefully as I remained obedient. On the 3096th day, Wolfgang decided to sell the van and instructed me to clean it. I suddenly noticed that the gate was slightly open. I then resumed cleaning when Wolfgang playfully slapped me on the behind. At that moment, his phone rang and he started talking, going inside the house because of the noise from the vacuum cleaner. Full of determination, I dropped the vacuum cleaner and ran out of the house. Wolfgang came back and most likely realized right away that I had escaped. In the meantime, I burst into an elderly woman's yard and asked her to call the police. I immediately explained to her that my name was Natascha Kampush and that I had been kidnapped. Soon the police arrived and asked for my identification, but all I could say was my name and that I had been kidnapped 8 years ago. My mother soon received a call with the good news, and the police took me to the station. I then asked the police about Wolfgang and learned that he had committed suicide in a cowardly manner by lying on the tracks in front of a train. After a while, my parents arrived at the station. After the reunion, the police led me out of the station, covering me with a blanket to shield me from the press. On the way home, I vividly recalled telling Wolfgang that only one of us would survive, and smiling through my tears, I realized that I was finally free.